Before we begin, I'd like to introduce the Georgia Department of Education Fine Arts team. In response to the need to have content-specific training for the fine arts, the Department of Education saw the need to hire staff members to represent the three largest fine arts content areas in Georgia. As a result, this is the fine arts team at the Georgia Department of Education. Jessica Booth, our fine arts program manager, has a background in the visual and media arts. Paul McLean is a fine arts program specialist who has a background in theater and film, and I'm Casey Hall, a fine arts program specialist who has a background in music. As a team, our main goal is to support fine arts teachers from across the state of Georgia by providing relevant and informative, content-specific professional development opportunities, high-quality instructional resources for the fine arts, and opportunities for collaboration and connection amongst fine arts teachers from all across the state of Georgia. Hey everyone, and welcome to The Balancing Act, Rebalancing Technology and Traditional Music Teaching Methods. Again, my name is Casey Hall, and I'm excited that you're here. The purpose of this webinar is to support your efforts in effectively balancing technology and our traditional music teaching methods after spending the majority of the past 2 years in a heavily tech-rich environment. So let's get started. Here's a brief overview of this webinar. First, we'll talk about our current reality of balancing technology with traditional teaching methods, what tipped the scale, and how we're kind of coming full circle. Then we'll weigh our options on both sides of the scale with some traditional teaching methods and technology integration strategies. Afterwards, we'll discuss how to find the right balance for you, examples from the K-12 music classroom, and an example balanced lesson from the Georgia Department of Education Fine Arts Instructional Resources for Music. At some point in our time as music teachers, we've more than likely been subject to some kind of technology integration in our music classrooms, right? We've had to juggle and balance all these other different kinds of educational initiatives and flashy instructional strategies within our own musical instructional practices at various points in our career. So, we often have to have this kind of balancing act in our classrooms. But what really tipped the scale this time, and you're probably already thinking about it, the most obvious answer, and it's the COVID-19 pandemic. It really flipped our whole world on its axis and pushed us into unprecedented times, as I'm sure you're aware. Honestly, within days, like 24 to 48 to 36 hours, we were asked to teach music completely differently than we've ever had to do it before. And it honestly forced us to lean heavily on technology, and we might not have been ready for that at the time because it was such a quick turnaround, right? But we had to use technology as our main tool, our guiding light in this pandemic, where we planned, we had to communicate through technology, we had to teach through technology, we had to assess our students through technology, all within a realm of a performance art, which I'm sure, as you know, has been super tricky and very challenging for us. But, we honestly had to put our, what was considered, normal, our normal music teaching methods on hold for a while, or if we didn't put them on hold, we had to adjust them to how we were teaching our students virtually. We had to, place kind of all of our tried and true instructional resources in the hands of technology, which, ultimately, like I was saying, tipped the scale in favor of technology as opposed to those, considered normal or traditional music teaching methods. But even still, we adapted. We managed somehow, as music teachers, to make it work to the best of our abilities. Was it easy? Absolutely not. But we persevered through it all and provided our students with the best music education we could under the, crazy, current circumstances. However, when most schools, started thinking about talking about going back face to face or in some form or fashion, some blended model, whatever your school district may have started coming back to this school year, we've kind of had to reconfigure what our world looks like in the music classroom with things like new health and safety protocols, mask mandates that, ultimately continue at even now to shape how we're teaching our students. So we've kind of come full circle. We're not really back to what was once considered normal, but we are kind of getting there. So that's kind of the big, driving question of this webinar is, really how do we rebalance that music instruction that was, for the past 2-ish years been fully virtual or some sort of virtual blended asynchronous synchronous model, and it was so tech heavy and tech savvy, to being in this kind of new normal of face-to-face learning. And what does that look like? How do we balance those things back out like we were doing prior to the COVID-19 pandemic? First, I think it's important to look at both sides of the scale and weigh the options that we currently have or we currently use. On one side, we have those normal music teaching strategies that we've used for years and years in the music classroom, and on the other, we have the technology integration piece. So let's look at these separately at first before trying to find some middle ground in between them. So when I think about the traditional or normal, music teaching methods or strategies that we have been teaching our music students for years and years and years, I'm really talking about all of the great strategies at any grade level or music content area, meaning like, band, chorus, orchestra, general music, music technology, things like that, really before technology was a factor, or really, separate from technology, what did we have before technology was even a thing, right? So when you're thinking about that, what strategies personally come to mind as you reflect on this idea? What are the strategies that I use in my classroom that have nothing to do with technology, or don't need technology, or need minimal technology use, if any technology is being needed at all, right? So kind of pause this video right now, maybe take a minute or two to kind of write down some thoughts if you'd like, or not, it's up to you. But, really try to reflect on that piece. What strategies or what kind of teaching methods do I use in my classroom, when I think about not having to use technology at all? If we took technology out of the equation, what is left? What teaching methods, what strategies, what instructional practices do I have in my arsenal as an educator to teach my students with? I've listed some here on the screen, as you can see, and many of these strategies have some foundation, or I should say, many of these strategies that you use probably in your classroom probably have some foundation within many of the music methodologies that are out there and that are often practiced by music teachers today. You don't necessarily need to be fully certified in these areas, but they do have a lot of great instructional practices that you can pull from, and they don't really necessarily need technology in order to teach them. So I did want to take a minute to highlight just a couple of these, traditional, normal music teaching methods that you may or may not be aware of, you may have not heard of, you may have be a little bit familiar with, or you may be completely certified in them. You don't have to be certified in these methodologies in order to teach music, but the strategies within them can be helpful no matter which one you choose. I know when I teach, I'm pulling from a lot of these different methodologies and the strategies that are within them in order to teach, but I'm not certified in all of these methodologies, obviously. But I did want to provide you with kind of a very broad understanding of their approaches. I'm not going to read them to you as you can see them on the screen, but what I want you to realize is that there are a lot of things that you may be doing in your classroom that you did not know have some foundation in these, more traditional, more popular music teaching methods that you may not have realized. Things like in orchestral work, how it's heavily leans on experimentation and imitation and stuff like that in the classroom. In the Kodai approach, it is a very sequential child developmental plan, kind of, as students are growing and learning in your classroom. In the Dalcroze approach, it's very heavily based on movement and experiencing music through movement and so on and so forth. And so a lot of these different methods that you have probably heard about, or maybe you've gone to a conference and seen some strategies from those, you can pull from in your classroom. And I don't think necessarily that these strategies themselves actually need technology in order to be successful. So I wanted, again, to highlight these to show you that these are some of the tried and true strategies that many teachers use, not just in the state of Georgia, but really across the country and across the world, that have been helpful for them with or without technology. Before we begin to talk more about technology integration, the other side of the scale, a good colleague and friend of mine, and also a fellow music educator who happens to have a degree in instructional technology, eloquently puts how technology is considered really an integral part of our daily lives as music educators now. So I'm going to read this one to you. She says, technology is no longer just a learning tool as it was perceived a decade ago. Modern advancements have now made technology a way of life for the younger generations. Many students can type on a keyboard better than they can write with a pencil. And not only that, but technology use is now an expected component of our daily teaching practices. Even in the music classroom, we are expected to utilize technology in some form of meaningful way. And honestly, my friend Sally is right. Even in the Teacher Keys evaluation standards, the third standard in particular regarding instructional strategies specifically points out effectively using appropriate instructional technology to enhance student learning as a best practice for all educators, no matter what content area. In addition, many of these sample indicators that you see on your screen below Standard 3 can also directly be applied to the use of technology for instructional purpose, regardless of the content area. And honestly, if you really think about it, when we incorporate technology in some form or fashion, whether that is as to be used as an instructional resource or as a part of an instructional strategy or a musical activity or a musical creation tool in our music classrooms, we are really being relevant to our students in a technological sense because we live in a heavily tech saturated environment in a world. It's what they grew up in, it's what they know. And really, because we are using it in our classroom, we are ultimately being relevant to who they are and just society as a whole because we are using technology in our classrooms. And really, it's honestly a win-win situation there. So another thing I also want to point out is, I think there's also a major misconception about technology integration in the fact that as music educators, I think sometimes we think that we have to incorporate it into our lessons all the time, every time, no matter what. And I don't really believe that to be true. I don't think that those indicators under those TEAC standards actually says that. Really, ultimately, it says that in order to enhance student learning, I don't think that means it has to be done 100% capacity every single time with technology integration. I think that, like Sally said, it should be done in a meaningful way, meaning that we should effectively plan to incorporate technology in such a way where it has a lasting impact on the students and ultimately, as the TEAC standards say, enhances their learning experiences so that they can take those away from the activity that you did, that you use technology with. So I really think that's really the big thing we need to focus on with technology integration and using it and how we balance it in our lessons is how are we going to do it in a meaningful way? How are our students still going to create music the day that we use technology? What part of technology are we going to use to incorporate it into our lessons and to kind of balance those things out? And so we're going to talk about that next. Now that we've looked at both sides of the scale, how do we find the happy medium between the two? How can we create balance in our music classrooms of technology and our traditional teaching methods? And so, important consideration about really the balancing act of it all is that nothing should fundamentally change about the content that we are teaching our students. We're still music educators, so what is our job? To teach music and to provide our students with the best music education as we possibly can. So that being said, really every music teacher's situation and journey as a music teacher is different, and it all depends on your individual situation. And even your individual situations often change from day to day or class to class and even from student to student. So all that to say, for the whole balancing act, I can't exactly provide specifics on how to balance technology and traditional music teaching methods because it's all individualized per each music teacher situation. However, I did want to provide you with some considerations as you yourself reflect on what will work best for you. And the first is to take time to adequately reflect on your current situation and How can you balance both traditional teaching methods with technology in a way that works for you? Remember, you know, as a scale often is, both sides of the scale are frequently, teetering on one side or another. And in our case, that's okay because, again, I don't believe that we always have to incorporate technology into our lessons. But when we do incorporate technology, it should provide students with a meaningful musical experience in some form or fashion. So I've listed on the screen some considerations as you begin to rebalance technology in your own teaching practices. And the first one is, what kind of technology do you have available in your school or in your classroom? Do you have tablets, laptops, individual student devices like phones? Do you have some sort of interactive whiteboard that you can project to? It all kind of depends. What technology do you have at your arsenal? And is that technology that you have, is it readily available? Can you pick it up and go, or do you have to schedule it as it might be shared between different classrooms or different students or different situations through your school? Is the technology tool or resource approved by your school or district administration? This can be frustrating at times because we might find a really great piece of technology that we want to use, but it hasn't been approved yet. And so we might have to make our case of why it is important to our administrators so we can have those kind of conversations. But that's an important thing to think about when you're first trying to plan for, balancing technology into your lessons. The next one is what is the instructional purpose of the device or the technology tool or the resource, excuse me. Is it for presenting or, displaying or teaching content? Is it for, students practicing, not just practicing their own instruments solo, but like practicing together as a whole group or in small groups? Is it for, are you using technology as a way to create music or to enhance the creation experience in music? And then how much time do you personally have? Because ultimately you're the person that's creating all of this and planning all this. How much time do you have to plan and to research and to learn that tech tool or resource? Because ultimately you have to be the expert before the students can be, even though they may pick it up super quickly, again, because it's what they've known, what they've grown up in all these years. So if you're not the expert, that's an important thing to do so that with any kind of questions that you have, you are quick to troubleshoot and stuff like that as you plan in your lessons. Have you included time in the lesson itself to actually teach the students how to use the technology or tool in a musical way? Again, it kind of goes back to the instructional purpose of the technology. Do you have classroom procedures put in place for using technology so that the technology is being safe, the students are safe, they're safe online as a good digital citizen, and things like that. And then lastly, I think is really one of the most important considerations when you are really applying trying to balance technology is, how am I getting students to create, perform, respond, or connect, those artistic processes that are in our standards within music, using this technology or resource? Again, it kind of goes back to that meaningful purpose of the technology. Again, and I'll go back a second time and say, remember, really, nothing's changing in the music classroom. We're still creating, we're still performing, we're still responding, and we're still connecting with music. But how are we going to do that with technology? And how can you balance that? The final thing I want to say about the whole idea of this balancing act that we've been talking about is, ultimately you have to do what works best for you and your students in your current situation. Remember, the whole real balancing act of using technology in the music classroom is not to replace those strategies and those resources and those activities that we use in our classrooms and replace it with technology. That's not the idea. The main idea of this balancing act is to use technology as a way to enhance your students' learning experiences in your music classrooms. Again, not to replace it, to enhance. So all those great strategies that you use in your music classroom, how can I kind of put in here and there some technology bits that will enhance their experience not replace those things that we have been teaching them, or methods that we have been teaching them in the music classroom. So that's kind of that big idea kind of wrap up for this whole balancing act thing. And ultimately it's up to you and how you want to do it for you and your students in your current situation. So in the following slides, I have provided you with some more tangible, just general technology tools for you to consider in a music classroom. Again, I didn't want to leave you here with nothing other than your own personal reflection. I wanted to provide you with some things you may have seen before, things you may have never heard of before, or things you might want to like, oh, that looks interesting, let me check it out. And that's something that you can do on your own time. But I wanted to provide you, again, with some tangible things that you could think about as you are trying to find balance between technology and some of the things that you would do in your music classroom. So I have some general tech tools. I have some more music specific technology tools, as well as some more, again, music content specific instructional resources and webinars by the Georgia Department of Education's Fine Arts team that you can take a look at, so should you need to, for your music classroom as you kind of journey through this whole balancing act, as everyone is at this point. So let's get started. So here are some general education tech tools and resources that you can take a look at to see if you'd like to incorporate them into your music classrooms in some way, regardless of grade level or content area. Again, I want to point out that these are more general education, not music specific tech tools. So you'd have to kind of be creative and figure out how could I make this tech tool or general education tech tool a musical tool or resource or activity. I had to do that often, and some of these I used, these tech tools I used in a musical way, and some of them I used them as a general education tech tool in the music classroom. Just kind of, again, depends on the purpose of what you're using the technology tool for. But I wanted to provide you with not an exhaustive list by any means, but just a more broad or general list of some tech tools that you may have heard about or you may not have heard about that you'd like to maybe pause this video and take a quick look at to see if it would be something that could work or may potentially work in your own music classroom. So I also wanted to provide everyone with some music-specific tech tools and resources to consider. Now, some of these are more teacher-focused, as in like educational webinars, whereas other ones are more centered around student creation activities in the music classroom. But one that I really wanted to point out is the Godot Fine Arts website. That is kind of your one-stop shop for everything that we currently provide to you for free through the Georgia Department of Education Fine Arts team. Again, things like educational webinars and professional development opportunities, as well as our instructional resources for music, which you may or may not be aware of, are actually free to you across the state of Georgia, which is great. Again, this list that you see on your screen is not exhaustive, but I did want to, again, provide you with some tangible things that you can, pause the video right now, take a look at, see, I wonder if I could use this tool for this purpose in my music classroom to get my students to enhance their learning experience like we've been talking about. So take a minute to pause it if you want to. Do some research, and now for the next following slides to wrap up everything, I did want to provide you with a tangible example of how I would take a pre-made lesson, and one of these lessons is actually from our instructional resources on our website, and how I would actually enhance it using technology and one of these tools that you see on your screen. So here we go. So for the example lesson, what I wanted to do was take a pre-existing lesson that's already great in and of itself and show you how I would balance it out with some additional tech tools that will ultimately engage and enhance the students' learning experiences in a music classroom. Now, for this lesson, I actually took it from our instructional resources for music, which can be found on our website. All you got to do is go to Google, type in Godot Fine Arts, click the first link that you see on the Google search page, and it'll take you to our Fine Arts website. Scroll down and you'll find these instructional resources for music. These instructional resources are free for you to use. You can download it, edit to meet the needs of your classroom, your students, your lesson planning style. Some of the activities you may want to teach, some of the activities you may not want to teach, some of the activities you may not have enough time for, and that's okay. You have the freedom to edit and the lessons as you see fit. Now, here's an example of one of them. It is a general music lesson, grade 4. It's the last unit of the kind of curriculum map that we have, and it's all talking about the musical idea of timbre. It's basically an introduction to timbre and talking about what timbre is, why different instruments sound like they do, and talking about the timbre of the instrument itself. Again, very introductory. You'll see the screenshots that I have for you on the screen here have all of the pieces of a lesson plan that you would want to see, or that administrators would want to see. Things like direct standards from our Georgia Standards of Excellence that will be covered across the lesson. Things like assessments that will be in the lesson. Things like differentiated learning that are in the lesson, as well as any other links to other resources that are attached to this lesson itself. As you see, there's a PowerPoint slide deck that's also attached called Timbre Talk that is an activity in this lesson. You also see that each of the student and teacher procedures are listed by activity, and this is actually a multi-week lesson, so it spans across multiple weeks as opposed to just a single standalone lesson. So this lesson, like I was saying, is already a great lesson in and of itself. It does have an accompanying PowerPoint presentation, which is already kind of a tech solution, but it's a kind of low tech at this point. So I want to show you how I would take this lesson, which is already great, like I said, and enhance it further to make the students' learning more impactful, more meaningful, more real world. And I would do that with a tool that I showed you in the earlier slide called Incredibox. Okay, so this is Incredibox, and it can be found at incredibox.com, and we're going to go to the web version because that's the free version. And it's going to pull up basically the dashboard. And on the dashboard, you can look at different versions that students want to do. The first 4 versions, they're all different. So they all have different loops and sounds in them. Those are all the free versions. So I love to use these 4 up top. I'm going to choose the Love just for today, just as an example. And it's going to take a minute to load. And basically what Incredibox is a music mixing app or activity, software kind of thing. And so as you see, when you first click on it, all these guys look all the same. And down here, you see the different loops, and each symbol, each color has a different loop, has different sound. And when you add them to the guys, it starts playing the loop. So I'll show you what that looks like. And you can turn the sound off without changing the sound, and I can turn it back on. I could highlight just that sound and not any of the others, or I could press X and it takes the sound completely away. But I'm going to keep that one up there because I like that one. And I'll add another one. And I'll continue to add them as I go along. Let's see. Now, as you could see in here, I was kind of showing you what it looked like to actually mute some of the loops so that you could hear some of the other loops together. And so basically this is a great starter conversation piece or activity for your students. One, it could be real life. This is kind of what DJ mixing does, and music producing and having all these different loops on top of each other, and how they all sound different. If you take a sound away, how it changes how the music sounds. And we're, again, it's very introductory activity to talk about timbre and why do some sounds sound a certain way and some sounds sound another way? Why does an instrument sound, why does a flute sound different than a tuba, for instance? It's just a great way to start the conversation, and I would use this as an introductory activity before we actually got started talking about timbre. we would talk about how these sounds all sound the same, or excuse me, the sounds and loops sound different, and how when we mix them together, it creates a whole different kind of sound and loop in and of itself. And that's why I really like this activity. Again, there's different versions with the completely different sets of sounds and loops, but there's also this really cool feature up here for students that they particularly like. It's basically a puzzle. If they connect all of the right loops, it unlocks a new video that gets looped in to this music they're creating. So in addition to this being a really great tool to use in your classroom, you can also set it to auto, which will automatically create its own mix via I really like the auto feature too because it allows me to have a constantly changing background music, and I would use that sometimes in other activities just as, again, background music as students were working together collaboratively or individually, just to have something going on in the background that they can continue to listen to. There's also an option to record. Now, we didn't use this option all the time, but if you would like to enhance this even further and use this tool even further, the recording feature actually lets students record the mixes that they are making as they are making it, which is really cool. They can send it to themselves via their school email or their a parent's or guardian's email, and then they can download that and actually share that with their friends. They can listen to it on MP3 device, or listen to it on iTunes or something like that, which is really cool that they can actually listen to the music that they created or the mixes that they created. And so it's it's a very taking ownership of their learning and their music creation process, which is really cool. And also that could be some sort of assessment opportunity for you as you continue to talk about that or use this app into your classroom. I also wanted to provide everyone with actual examples of these kind of tech tools used in a music classroom. And in regards to this lesson on timbre, I've taught a very similar lesson on timbre. It wasn't this exact lesson from our instructional resources, but it was a very similar introduction lesson to what timbre is and how it's applied in music. And I used Incredibox again as that tangible, real life, engaging activity to enhance their learning of the concept of timbre. And so you'll see the girl on the left, she's playing around with the app on the tablet, and then in the middle, these guys were so excited. They were so pumped about their mixes that they wanted me actually to listen to it. So I put the earphones or the headbuds on to listen to it myself, and here's their kind of jamming out session they were having with their music on their tablet. We also had a class set of headphones for them to use, and headphone splitters, so they could have multiple students on one device at a time and kind of being more collaborative with it, which was really cool. Another idea that you could do with the same exact lesson as a summative assessment or a formative assessment opportunity is using one of the apps from earlier called Flipgrid to record students' understandings of their learning. So you'll see in the top right corner the picture. I have a student, she's actually videoing herself talking about what timbre is based on the discussion, based on the lesson that we were having. Now that could be both a formative or a summative assessment, and I could go back in and listen to all of those videos, and they weren't shared online or anything, so don't worry about that if you're not familiar with Flipgrid. But I was able to see actually what my students know from their own mouths, which was really cool. We've also done a very similar lesson with timbre. I'm trying to keep it in the same mode here. And we actually went to the media center and went on the computers and did some research about instrument families and why the instruments sound differently. Like, why do woodwind instruments sound different than a brass instrument, or why do percussion instruments sound different as opposed to string instruments and things like that. So I actually went to the computer lab or the media center and we actually did research so that students could learn, which is really cool. And so there's just different ways that we can use tech to enhance their learning other than just kind of that lecture format or the traditional methods that we would use, but just use them and enhance them with some of the technology that is available to us now, especially now that there's so much available to us now. So I hope this example lesson and honestly the webinar as a whole was beneficial for you. Though I know it was a bit broad, I hope you can reflect on the broad ideas of how to effectively balance technology and traditional teaching methods, no matter what your current situation is, for your own students. Because ultimately, we want them to have the most meaningful musical experience as possible in our music classrooms. So thank you so much for watching this webinar on the Balancing Act, Rebalancing Technology and Traditional Music Teaching Methods. My hopes are that you learned something, take some time to reflect on it, and begin to use the information discussed in this webinar to inform your own teaching practice and support your efforts to becoming the best music teacher you can be in order to reach and teach all students in your own music classrooms. Here's my contact information if you would like to discuss this further or have any additional questions. I'd love to chat. I would ask that if you have a moment to please fill out our brief feedback survey using a QR code reader or type the URL in your browser. One of our goals at the Georgia Department of Education Fine Arts team is to provide relevant and informative content-specific professional development for fine arts teachers across the state. So any feedback you could provide us would be greatly appreciative and highly beneficial so that we can provide you with the best professional development possible. Additionally, if you need a certificate of completion for documenting professional development hours, there is an accompanying quiz that you can take to receive a certificate of completion. In order to receive your certificate, you must pass the test with a score of 80% or higher. The certificate will be emailed to you shortly after submitting a passing score. Thanks again for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope you all have a great day.